The blades of the iron cradle hummed, a low, metallic vibration that rattled the observation deck's thick glass. Varric stood at the console, his 7 limbs locked in a rigid, formal posture. The training gauntlet was empty, save for the recruit. "Initiate sequence 9 Alpha, Varric." "Sequence confirmed," he replied, his voice flat. He watched the screen. The board predicted she would shatter in 8 seconds, crushed by the artificial gravity. Kaylin Thorne stood in the center of the pit, her flight suit loose, a small iron magnet clipped to her wrist. "The test is active," Varric announced. She did not crouch. She did not tighten her stance. She simply reached up and adjusted the hair tie on her wrist, her movements as sluggish as a waking sleeper. Then the gravity field hit. It should have been a terminal impact. The floor sensors flashed red, then surged to maximum load. Kaylin didn't fall, she moved. She clicked the magnet to her wrist, the sound like a gavel falling. She leaned into the pressure, her body shifting with the pull of the field. She walked, each step precise, avoiding the dead zones where the crush was absolute. Varric leaned forward, his bioluminescent eyes pulsing. The data showed her path was not a straight line, but a curve that tracked the field's oscillation. "What is she doing?" Halu the scribe whispered. "Survival," Varric muttered. The gauntlet fired the drone swarm. 6 jagged metal interceptors tore through the air, aimed directly at her position. They expected panic. We offered them physics. Kaylin didn't look at the drones. She tracked the path of the gravity well, using its own force to slingshot her body toward the primary hub. She slammed into the bulkhead, her hand catching the edge of a floor panel. She ripped it free with a grunt of exertion. She swung the heavy, iron-filing-laden plate like a shield, catching the lead drone in its delicate core. Crack, click, thrum. The drone exploded, its shrapnel spiraling into the next one. She didn't break stride. She was dismantling the most expensive training facility in the sector with a piece of salvaged floor and a magnet. Varric watched the monitor. The board predicted she would be pulverized. Instead, Kaylin moved through the chaos, her hands, jagged with old white scars, working with a speed that defied the optical sensors. The drone blade screamed, inches from her face. She was still, her eyes fixed on a single, tiny vibration point on the assembly. She reached out, tapped the metal housing, and the entire multi-ton assembly shudders to a complete halt, silent and dead. 19 seconds. The hum of the cradle died, replaced by the hiss of cooling vents. Kaylin stepped out of the pit, wiping grease from her fingers onto her flight suit. She looked up at the viewing gallery, noticed Varric's frozen posture, and gave a small, sheepish grin. "Sorry," she called out. "I know I'm a bit unconventional. I practice a lot." Varric's hand hovered over the terminal. He looked at the data stream one last time. There was no error. The algorithm was broken. He keyed the override, selecting the purge protocol. The record vanished. The facility wiped the footage, the logs, and the casualty reports of the drones. He didn't want the high command to know what he had just seen. He didn't want them to know that they were not training a recruit. They were sharing a cage with a weapon that had spent a lifetime learning how to be a person. Kaylin turned and walked toward the mess hall, whistling a low, simple tune. Varric sat back, his crystalline joints finally still. The magnet sat on his desk, inert, a weight no algorithm could measure. The most dangerous weapons are the ones that never leave the sheath. The silent truth of humanity remained buried under layers of classified steel. Varric turned off the light. He would sleep now, but the image of her scarred hands remained burned into his mind. He finally understood that some things are not meant to be logged, categorized, or predicted. They are meant to be feared. The quiet of the room felt heavier than before. He looked at the empty pit. The human was gone, but the atmosphere she left behind still held the sharp, cold promise of a storm that had not yet broken. He leaned back, listening to the silence of the facility. It was a silence that spoke of survival, of grit, and of the terrifying, humble nature of the Deathworld species. He closed his eyes. The mission was over. The file was gone. The secret was kept. But the fear remained, a permanent fixture in the cold, dark heart of his command. He knew then that the galaxy was changing, and he was simply the first to be left behind by the shift. He breathed out, his chest plates rattling softly in the dark. Silence was the only option left. He accepted it, a sentinel watching over a secret that could burn the stars. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown to an inevitable war. He looked at his hands, mimicking the stillness of the human recruit, wondering if he, too, could ever be that calm in the face of such absolute, quiet power. He stood up, walked to the window, and stared at the vast, uncaring void outside. The stars were bright, uncaring pinpoints of light. He realized he was not guarding the galaxy from her. He was guarding the galaxy from the truth of what humanity had become. It was a lonely vigil, but it was his. He gripped the edge of the glass, his claws scraping against the surface. Tomorrow the cadets would return, expecting the same old tests, the same old results, but he would know. He would always know. The Iron Cradle was no longer a training ground. It was a museum of a lost illusion. He stepped away from the glass, letting the darkness consume him. He didn't turn the lights back on. He didn't want to see the emptiness of the room anymore. He wanted to feel the weight of the secret, to carry it like a burden until his own circuits eventually failed. It was the only way to remain. He was an overseer, and his final duty was to bury the truth deep, deeper than anyone would ever find. The shadows of the room seemed to stretch and twist, reflecting his own internal chaos. He felt small, insignificant, and utterly unprepared for the future that the human recruit had just whispered into existence. The storm was coming, and there was nowhere left to hide. He exhaled a final, cold breath, and the room went completely, utterly silent, waiting for a dawn that would bring no comfort. The end had begun, and he was the only one who realized it. It was a heavy, cold realization that made his very core ache with the pressure of 1,000 dying suns. He stood still. He waited, he watched the void, he accepted the dark.